Hey, everybody, wake up. It's time for the History You Forgot podcast, the podcast where three veteran teachers with almost 90 combined years of teaching try to catch you up with the stuff that you probably slept through when you were younger. So buckle up, guys, because today's our first episode. We're tackling the American Revolution. It's coming at you next.
I'm Jeff Breedlove. I've been teaching nearly 30 years, but mostly I teach world history, a little economics, and European history.
My name is Jason Jones, and I'm a geography teacher. I've been teaching this year will be 33 years.
And I'm Jason Schmoida, and I've been working on year 30 here, teaching U.S. history mostly, international relations, and some election stuff.
So, always got to have one more than the rest of us, don't you?
I had to figure out a way to make it sound. I don't have 33 like Jones, though.
I know once I hit that, but then you know what? No. Welcome. So first one, guys, right? I think we've been practicing this for a while. So welcome to our first one. I think we got this going on. We have decided, right, that we are going to highlight, right, the stuff that you should have paid attention to the first time. So the things that we would have taught you in maybe 3 weeks, we're going to boil down to 30 minutes or so. And we're going to help grease the skids a little bit with a cocktail each week that has some connection to the theme. So Schmoida, what are we drinking?
This is a 1776. It's basically an old fashioned, and we kind of created it in a way that it had a few colonial themes, some early America stuff, some East Coast themes. It's basically 1776 rye. So thank you to, yeah, right. Not to, I don't know if we'll get in trouble for that, but I throw just a little bit of Applejack in it. And of course I smoke it with some apple wood. It's got a little cherry with the juice from the cherry in it, of course, and maple syrup. So a little bit of that old-fashioned East Coast flair. If you'd like to imbibe and join us with one, you're welcome to it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. So cheers.
Let's go.
First episode and long, successful run, boys. All right. All right, so we thought we would start with the American Revolution, which we're going to try to break down each of these weekly casts into sort of the most important things, right? So we'll give you a little background. We'll do sort of the most important things that lead up to it, kind of pick 2 or 3 things that you need to remember and know, and then we'll kind of go from there, right? So we'll see how it goes. So I think we need a little background context for the American Revolution. Mr. Jones, why don't you lead us off?
Yeah, so I think we're going to start with the Enlightenment. Mm-hmm. And if you think about the Enlightenment, which, of course, started in Europe and then traveled across the Atlantic Ocean into the Americas, you're talking about individual rights. You're talking about fundamental rights. Life, liberty, property is something that a gentleman named John Locke shared in Europe that he thought were fundamental rights that all people had. Right, our Creator provided them for us, and of course, in the Americas, it was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that's was Thomas Jefferson. But the idea of the Enlightenment, you're talking about the consent of the governed, republicanism, where you have the people are the power, right, and you vote your leaders into office. There isn't one central king, queen that is absolute ruler, and so. And they called it a social contract, right? You gave up a little bit of your rights to have a just and fair society, and by doing that, you didn't have a king, you didn't have a ruler, or you did have a government, I guess I should say. But the people were actively engaged and actively involved.
Yeah, and so I'm thinking, as you just brought that up, right? This whole idea of sort of shifting styles or being able to question. The other thing that I think we need to cover is the new economic sort of style that was going on, right? We're talking about mercantilism. There's a name that you should all remember, where it relies on colonial sort of empires, right? The faraway places provide the natural resources. They all get shipped back to the mother country. The mother country then turns them into goods and services, right? And then ships them right back at a rate. It's all about national wealth, right? Trying to make the mother country rich. It's a competitive nature, right? It's guy who has the most gold and silver wins, right? I think we have to remember that. I always love the fact that lots of people refer to it as mercantilism. Right? It's not.
A lot of kids do. Yeah.
But I think that also then leads Schmoida to, if you think about the Enlightenment and then mercantilism, you've got an American colonial, empire, right? I guess you call it actually. The Americas were colonies but they're a little different.
little different.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think we take that stuff for granted, right? We forget that before the Enlightenment, most governments were rulers, authoritarian in our words today, right? And then this is the idea that people could actually manage a government themselves. Right. The idea was preposterous to people before that. So it's super interesting. And go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, remember, rulers in Europe, divine right of kings, right? They thought God placed them on earth to rule, right? And how could the people rule?
Right. And we're talking about a government of and by and for the people, which I think, and that alone makes this a little bit unique, because what's going to happen is that we're going to create a country based on those ideas. And that's really not quite been done. Although if you go back to the British kind of Civil War era, which is where John Locke is from, right?
Right.
John Locke talked about this in terms of giving Parliament more power, because then the people were better represented from this all.
Well, I was going to say representation's a big topic here.
Nice. Representation's a huge topic here. Absolutely. And
what is the slogan again?
It's taxation.
Remember?
It's taxation without representation. If you didn't hear that one, you were definitely snoring.
Really?
No
Come on,
about
people.
that, right?
We got to do some heavy lifting.
Exactly. I think the thing about it is that we were inspired by these European developments, but we also were creating something new.
Hopefully.
And when you talk, in the future, we'll use the term, a future from now, of course, we'll use the term American exceptionalism, the idea that America was unique and something different. And I think you're beginning to see that, in this period right here. It all really turns on two things. One, for 120 years, we developed 13 colonies.
There we go.
People forget, 120 years, that's a long time for 13 colonies to develop. And in that time, we culturally developed differently, right? We developed our own thing. They talked about even the dialects were different, the language, the accents, things like that the British, when they came during the French and Indian War in the 1760s, they noticed that things were different.
You mean like language, like the words we use, the way we handle ourselves? Especially
like slang and accents and things like that.
Which I never thought about. That to me is kind of fascinating.
It's interesting.
The Webster Dictionary, wasn't it written purposefully with different English language to be different than
different versions, not the Queen's English, but
to make America different. 100%. We were trying to avoid being just an extension of Europe, right? That's great. The other thing that plays a role right here is that French and Indian War. Right. It was part of a bigger 7 Years' War. It was this huge thing for Britain. Jones, I've heard you say this is like the First World War. It kind of was for sure, but our little element of it was the French and Indian War, and this was for control over the Ohio Valley, and we could get into details on that, but here's what's important. This is the thing that I think you should remember. When that war ended and we won, we were restricted by the British, and that's big. The French were removed from North America, but most important of all that, the British needed to pay for that war, right? They needed to pay for that war, and so they were asking us now to obey the laws, the navigation acts that had been put in place because of mercantilism. They hadn't been really, paying attention to those laws. So we called that period a period of salutary neglect, which means we weren't doing what we were supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Kind of like when your parents say, you shouldn't do this, but then they don't really, give you any consequences when you do.
But I think that your point is actually, that makes you just think of something, right? When you're talking about mercantilism and this salutary neglect, right? The 7 Years' War is going to come up again, right? I mean, 100%. The fact that the 7 Years' War ended so badly for the French, right? From the world history perspective means that they're going to be a little resentful, a little bitter, a little angry, right? So when it comes time, we're going to talk about here in a little bit, they're very eager to jump in and stick it to the British, right? I mean, I think that's what we have to keep remembering.
Pay attention to the French involvement in the war when we get there, for sure, because I think that has something to do with this. And of course, then what they expect from us.
100%.
Which they don't get,
which nobody ever thinks about.
Right. For sure.
So then, Jason,
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, Jason, you were talking about the paying for the war and how the British are going to try to force the American colonies to do that.
And, you mentioned when you're not enforcing a rule and all of a sudden you try to enforce it, you're going to get a little attitude and a little bit of pushback. So they were asking us now. So the British came in and said, hey, will you pay just some small taxes? Stamp Act, eventually the Townshend Acts, and so on. Will you not create problems with the natives in the Ohio Valley? Because we don't want to pay for conflict there. Can you just stay out of there? It was a proclamation of 1763. All these little restrictions and now new approach for the colonists to deal with, it created some rebellion, and we boycotted goods. And if you really wanted a deep dive, which we won't do, but like you could get into all
30
that
minutes,
back
right?
and
Yeah.
forth, and that back and forth is what ultimately led to it. So we did pick a couple things to focus on for sure,
Right, so we've got some background here, right? We've got some context.
for
we
sure.
kind of set it up. Everyone to remember how
For
we
sure.
got here.
Yeah.
If you had to pick though, like the 2 or 3 things that somebody needs to remember about, like the catalyst, right? Like the boom, boom, boom. What would, I mean, history teacher, what'd you go for?
Usually, excuse me, the 1776 got me.
So
Maybe you
some of
don't
us
want a
are new to this
1776
whole-
while you do this. Usually what people point to is they point all those acts and all the rebellion, the Boston Massacre,
Oh, there we go.
and then the Boston Tea Party. So kind of in that order, right? And that's the way I look at it. It was British troops stationed in Boston after we have this period where the British are now trying to enforce these rules and trying to enforce taxation and all that kind of stuff. The British troops got into a skirmish with the people of Boston, and it turned into a massacre, which was total, PR
Just saying.
Right.
on the Americans. It's BS, right? It really was.
Fake news.
Although people died, so you don't want to take it too lightly. People actually did die.
Yeah, but like what, like 2 or 3?
Okay, yeah.
No, I'm not done trying to like make it less, but it wasn't a.
But a child was, he's kind of, there's some sadness to that. But people always joke it was the worst snowball fight because it really started out as kind of people throwing snow and ice, and the next thing you know, it was done.
Well,
but that actually led to a period of cooling off, and people kind of forget that. And the British kind of pulled out of Boston after that.
Well, a lot of the taxes and the acts that you're talking about were daily taxes because it was taxes on paper and tea and things that people used every day.
Consumables. But I like the idea that you just said, though. Sorry, I'm trying.
That's okay.
The fact that, like, first of all, it's 120 years that we're talking about here, right? So I think, sometimes people think it's boom, boom, boom. And yet, even though there have been some skirmishes, right, the Boston Massacre ends with a cooling off period, right?
Yeah.
So how does it go then from a cooling off period to full on?
Well, eventually the British are going to have to continue to enforce the law and continue to try to get those taxes. And while it does bring troops out of Boston and gives a little bit of freedom to Boston for the short term, eventually those same problems come back.
Okay.
They're not solved by any stretch of the imagination.
Because there's a daily.
Yeah, it's daily.
Yeah.
And that kind of brings us to what I think is that final really interesting point, which is that Boston Tea Party, which was, so the British passed a bunch of taxes called the Townshend Acts. I kind of mentioned those earlier. These are really small taxes. We were not getting just ridiculous taxes. These were small. And that particular set of taxes was, like you said, Jones, just these little taxes on everything you could possibly use. We still boycotted those goods. Now, when they repealed the Townshend Acts, they left a tax on tea, and they were trying to rescue the British East India Tea Company. And they basically said, you're going to have to buy tea from the British East India Tea Company. But the price of tea went down. So we were actually paying less for tea, but we were being told what tea to drink.
Wait.
So you see a little political something going there.
Yeah. And I'm trying to remember, that tax is actually sometimes called a tariff.
For sure.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we're talking about here.
It
Right.
is.
Absolutely.
It's absolutely on imports.
Trying to bring it all together here, right?
Yeah.
Right.
There were a few, if I remember right, colonial tea producers, but a lot of it was being brought
Well,
in.
the whole point of mercantilism was, right, there shouldn't be any producers.
Correct.
They should provide the natural resources
exactly
super inexpensively.
Yes.
Sent back then to Great Britain.
Yeah.
East India Tea Company.
It was all about exploiting the colony.
Absolutely.
For sure. And we understood that. Even though it was cheaper tea, we didn't like the fact that we were being told what to do. So the Sons of Liberty dumped a bunch of tea. Then I think millions of dollars in today's.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In today's world, that would be millions of dollars worth of tea. The British reaction to that was pretty heavy handed. Because after that, then they closed Boston Port. They brought troops back into Boston. They revoked some charters. And the next thing you know, you have what we were calling the Intolerable Acts. The Intolerable Acts then led to the First Continental Congress. So hop, skip, and jump. And we have this organization that's going to look a little bit most like a government.
Right.
Even though we've had some organization in the colonies at this point in time, this probably looks most like the beginnings of a government. Okay. And the First Continental Congress told the colonies, hey, not only get ready to boycott some more, but get ready because they're coming for your guns. Get your militias ready.
There we go. This is a little familiar refrain.
Yep.
So we've got some long-term context, right? Context nicely done, right? Everyone, I think we got it set up. We got some catalytic moments. We're kind of setting ourselves up here, right, for the end-all be-all. But I think we also have to remember, you're talking about these catalytic moments here, right, that the colonies, right, give us, what is it, like 50-50 loyalists to the British?
Yeah, that's
How
a
many
great
people
question.
Really on board before it starts?
Benjamin Franklin claimed a third. But his claim was that there were a third of the people that were totally on board, patriots, a third that were loyalists, people that opposed the war, especially when it comes to independence, opposed independence.
Loyal to the king.
Loyal to the king, right? Loyal to the crown for sure. And then there's a third that were clueless.
Right.
Which, you know,
kind of like today.
or
very
maybe
much
they
so.
slept through their history class.
I don't want to speculate on exactly how they were clueless, but they were
Right.
clueless one way
Maybe
or
we'll
the
just
other.
give them the benefit of the doubt. They were just far away.
For sure.
It's
For sure.
clueless by distance.
So you said they're coming for the Colonial guns, and so that's going to lead to
Nice.
Lexington and Concord.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Right?
So if you
100%.
think about it, there are probably a couple major battles, right, that you're going to have to remember, people, right? And we're going to start with, I think, Lexington and Concord's a good one,
Yep.
right? So
Yeah. So
anybody know more? Okay.
well,
I'm
I'll start,
not
and then
the
we'll
guy.
let the American
I
history
was
guy
gonna say,
finish.
'cause I'm
I'll
not
jump
the
in.
guy.
I'll jump in.
But so Lexington and Concord, we've all heard of Paul Revere, right? And I know Paul Revere gets all the credit for alerting the colonists that the British are coming, but there were a lot more writers than just Paul Revere, if you really dig into that. But the British were coming to take the ammunition of the colonists because of the heightened tensions in the region. And so this becomes known as a shot heard around the world when this battle starts, and really is the first battle where the colonists show, hey, maybe we can hold our own a little bit.
Yeah. And it really, I think, you know, it's even hard to call that a battle,
Right.
but yet we stood up, we used guns, we fired.
Yeah, right. First
And
time.
so, yeah, the resistance was not just talk.
I think if I remember correctly, the colonists had maybe double the soldiers at this particular battle, about
Right.
3,000 to 1,500
Yeah.
British soldiers.
Yeah.
So definitely, and obviously then inflicted more damage.
Yeah, and I think you have to remember
No
too,
doubt.
right? As we've talked about, you know, hopefully in our classes, is that Britain's fighting a war in theory, right, far from home, right? The colonists are going to have the benefit of little defensive sort of, you know, guerrilla warfare.
For sure.
The British are going to have to continually send people abroad, right? So you said like the
Yeah.
numbers aren't as great.
And you've got to keep the home front in support,
Yeah.
which is hard to do,
3,000.
especially as the war drags on.
Yeah,
Right.
it's so interesting to watch who had more money, who had more weapons, who had the bigger navy, who had,
Right.
and it's always Britain. But the distance, that was huge, right? The home field advantage for us really was difficult for them.
Yeah,
so
and I think that
yeah.
plays out over history, though, over and over and
Yes.
over again, right? That's not an
plenty of other
unusual-
wars where
I
we
was
can
just
talk
gonna
about
say,
that.
right, where
Absolutely, yeah.
Somebody, the Goliath goes in, and yet they
For sure.
get beat.
So the shot heard around the world has happened. We've got probably more boatloads of redcoats coming to the Americas, right? You've got Washington trying to set up a colonial army that is using militia, but also colonial army troops, coordinating all of that. And so what's the next big battle?
I know. What do you think?
Well, you know, there's a few in there, and it's that combined effort between the Continental Army as it's forming and the militia. Sometimes they work well together. Sometimes they didn't work real well together, right? But I think that we always want to point to the turning point,
Okay.
right? So let's hop, skip, and jump just a tad. The British give up Boston. They decide it's not worth their while anymore,
Okay.
and they are trying to take these middle colonies. We talk about the middle colonies being New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware. People forget that's middle.
I was just saying,
Right, that's middle back then, and they're trying to use those middle colonies to completely suffocate New England, and that's where a battle took place in New York that we call the turning point. And I
Nice,
think
okay.
that's a good place for us to go.
So as you say that, though, I think it's a great place to go, right? So you got Lexington, Concord, you got Saratoga, but I like the idea, right, that the British approach is to sort of split the colonies into three distinct groups.
Correct.
So the southern, the middle, and then the New England, because if I'm not mistaken, right, they believe that the middle and the southern had more loyalists in them.
Correct.
So if they were able to kind of control New England,
Especially in the South.
right. So I think that's the goal, right? So you've got the British sort of coming down out of Canada, like Lake Champlain, right? You've got a couple generals. You've got, Howe in New York. You've got Burgoyne.
Yep.
But then you've got the Americans led by Gates. And this will bring up, right, this is clearly the battle where Benedict Arnold,
Yep.
right, sort of gets his name. But, Saratoga is really important, right, because the British only had 6,000 troops or something, I think, under Burgoyne.
Because it was just Burgoyne.
Right, because
which is great. Yeah.
he pushed on when everyone recommended that he comes down.
Down
Right?
from
Once
Lake,
the battle-
Lake Champlain.
once the Ticonderoga, is that right? Is that where this comes to fort that he's sort of
It's nearby.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Well, I was just going to say Benedict Arnold at this time was an American general,
correct,
who was injured. One. Yeah, a good general, injured in the battle.
Right.
And this is going to be where he gets his name, as we think of it today, as a traitor after this battle.
I think that's important, right? Because I think that, again, right, this is the battle where America has way more troops. They got about 11, 12,000, right? How
shouldn't have.
I know, right? How goes from New York to Philadelphia, right? In order to sort of like
British
take control.
General Howe.
The British general, like, well done. Burgoyne isn't on time, is a little late. And then there's, what is the guy's name?
St. Ledger. St. Ledger was coming down from Lake Ontario, and the militias just completely picked him off. So if you think about it, there was supposed to be 3 British generals all bringing their troops to surround Gates, Montgomery, Arnold, all those, and only one of them made it, and he was late.
Right, and he made it for all the wrong he was late for all the wrong reasons.
All the wrong reasons.
Burgoyne was
Gentleman Johnny.
Gentleman Johnny. He was a playwright when he lived in England. He was in the House of Commons, and he got to the Americas, and he was so intent on making his troops happy that on the way to this major battle, finding them women and booze became the focus.
Which is so weird in today's world, but that was actually not uncommon.
Yeah, when you think about the way
even into the Civil War, you see that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the nature of warfare, right? Number 2 is, it takes days. Everyone knows you're coming, right? There's these sort of rules around engagement that are very gentlemanly.
Yeah.
Right. So, the idea that, that Burgoyne is late or whatever is because, communications are not what they used to be, or not what they used to be, but they are now. So, you've got this sort of situation where they're all coming from 3 different areas, but they're not quite sure, right? And
the gentlemanly way to fight a war is something that's, I think, worth mentioning because they stood 100 yards apart, 3 or 4 deep in lines, and shot at each other in the wide open.
Wearing red.
Wearing blue, right? It's not until World War I that dark uniforms and camouflage.
Right. And people used to like pack a picnic lunch, right? Because they
sit on the hill,
time, right? Head out to the battleground, sort of watch this skirmish a little bit, right? And then, fun family fun. So I think Saratoga takes on another sort of dimension here, right? Because when Arnold, who distinguishes himself with bravery, when Howe's troops stand up and Burgoyne is defeated, there's some serious consequences here, right? That I think probably play out much differently than anybody would have expected.
Yeah. One of the reasons why it's a turning point is the British moved to the South. So you get into the South and the war really bogs down in the South. It becomes much more rural. And, a visiting army doesn't do well in the rural areas. And it really bogs down. They took 3 major ports, including Charleston. They found that taking those ports didn't do much good. They'd taken cities up north that didn't do much good. When you get into that rural part of the war, it's tough. Now, then...
Jason, does this win France?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're kind of talking about why Saratoga was a turning point anyway, right?
I think we need to go back to Saratoga.
Well, we are. We're really covering it.
Let's just do it.
One of the reasons is because the British decided to move south. The other reason, really, it's a turning point is because the French, after Saratoga, see the British are screwing this thing up.
Right.
We got a shot. We could actually maybe involve ourselves in a way that we can punish the British and get back a little bit of North America.
Right. We can. I mean, I think that's important, right? Because without the French, clearly the whole thing would have gone different. And there's lots of other ways we could approach this, but France sees the colonists now as viable, right? And this is their opportunity probably to stick it to the British, right? A little retribution for the 7 Years' War, French-Indian War. So, they may have been a little hesitant before, but the fact that the colonists beat the British, right, at Saratoga for the first time, right? So then all of a sudden that then
major war
brings them into it, which then sets up Yorktown.
Yeah. Other than little battles. Yeah, that was an impressive one that showed both some strength of the Americans as well as the stupidity, honestly, of the British.
Yeah.
But it transitioned so well to the end of the war.
Or maybe arrogance of the British.
100%.
No way.
Absolutely, Jones. No doubt.
I mean, because if you think then about, and maybe I'm jumping ahead here, but you think now about Yorktown,
right,
where General Cornwallis of the British took his army to the coast and basically allowed himself to be trapped.
Yeah.
Right. Because he thought he was going to get aid from his navy.
Yeah. And it was the French fleet rather than the British. And that's perfect. It totally sets up Yorktown, right? A rural war that's difficult for the British and French help. And if you think about what Washington was able to do to Cornwallis, as you explained, and that kind of did it. There's some other extenuating circumstances there. I mean, the British were concerned about balance of power in Europe, and there's a few other things. But like at that point, where do they go? They've been to New England. They've been to the middle part of the country. They've been to the South.
And Britain's getting tired of the war.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they're not having success.
Yeah, and the British people.
Yeah,
right?
At home. Yes.
Yeah.
Was it 5 or 6 years? We're talking. What year we're talking Yorktown? Give me.
81.
Right,
so Yorktown was 81. The treaty wasn't until 1783, but in 1781, did I say 18? I did.
Yeah.
1781, 1783, we get the treaty.
Okay,
so there was not much in between.
No, I think that's good. I mean, if you're thinking about all the things you need to know, right? Those are the 3 battles, right? We got Lexington, Concord, we got Saratoga, we got Yorktown. But I think the fun thing is that I think when you start thinking about, right, like, so if you call the turning point is Saratoga, like, so what happens if that had gone differently? What if Burgoyne had arrived on time? What if Howe had come up? What if St. Leger had not lost, right? And so all of a sudden the British are defeated. I think what you said, this new world is not at all what America probably would have ended up as. It would have changed. So the whole nature of the 19th century.
Yeah. The wormhole there is really interesting.
The what?
The wormhole you can go down.
Oh, totally.
Right? Like, if Howe, St. Leger, Burgoyne all trapped Montgomery, Arnold, Gates, that leaves Washington exposed in Philadelphia.
Right.
And probably don't have French involvement.
Right. Yeah. No French involvement.
Right.
The British maybe never have to go to the South and get bogged down in the rural war.
Right.
Yeah. And the French hadn't come in, believe it or not. That is a good thing financially for the French in the long run, right?
Right. Basically, bankrupt the French.
Absolutely. Their involvement in the revolution, which is going to then, their bankruptcy is going to eventually trigger the French Revolution,
right?
Extensively, which is a whole nother podcast I think we'll get into.
For sure.
But I think when you start thinking about that, there's a couple, I just think, if you think about if the British had won Saratoga, right, the whole war would have gone differently, more than likely, right? The British, could very well have won them without the French help for the Americans. But I think there's all sorts of really cool things. Like, would America then have become sort of a Canada, right? Would we have sort of eventually gained representation, but that would have made Great Britain hugely powerful, right? The economic strength of these colonies would have just given Great Britain this gigantic advantage of everybody else.
Would we have eventually succumbed to that and been cool with it?
Yeah.
Or would there be another rebellion down there? That's what a lot of times people say. Well, at some point, is there another rebellion to come at that point?
Let me take you down another rabbit hole.
Here we go.
Yeah.
All right. So the Americans win, as we did. The British go back. We've got 13 colonies with their own militias. And we're going to talk about this in the next episode, but no real, government leader, right? And now the British turn around in 2 years and come back before the Constitution's been written. Would the new United States have been able to handle that at that time?
We talk about, well, now you got a country. What are you going to do with it?
Right.
And that's kind of setting us up for the next episode.
But I think the thing you got to think about, which I love, is that, that what if, that's totally a rabbit hole. But, there's so many ways. And I would love to think that if you kind of have this basic understanding of the revolution, that you could then kind of think deeply, maybe. I mean, just, history turns, on the edge of a knife, right? That there isn't any one way it should have gone or didn't go. But, what if yourself into some pretty cool conversations, actually.
It's super interesting. I love the what ifs. They're fun.
Totally. Yeah. Right. I mean, there's so many ways you can go with this. But I think eventually, right, so if we've got this down, tell me if I'm wrong, we've got background, context, we've got catalyst, we've got 3 major battles, one of them being a turning point.
Yeah.
So I think, I don't know, we're kind of thinking now here about setting up like the American states, right? Which is where we're going to go next.
Yeah.
But I think at this time, right, we're going to introduce sort of a feature weekly that we're going to call, all right, so from this time period, who would you want to have a drink with?
Yep. A 1776.
Clearly, a 1776,
there
right?
we go,
So Jones, pick what? Who would you, if you had to pick all the people or think about any of them?
You know what? We brought him up earlier. I think I'm going to go with Benedict Arnold. I think it's very interesting. He, here's a guy, we talked about his bravery at Saratoga. He is making a name for himself in the American Army, but he is not getting the recognition as quickly as he would like. And so he's not getting bumped up the chain of command quick enough. He's got a wife who's a loyalist. And if you remember from earlier in the show, a loyalist is someone loyal to the King of England. And so she is pushing him to leave the American Army or the Continental Army. And after,
could you imagine that home life, the
I was
conversation?
going to say that.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, think about that, right?
right.
Kind of
And here's a guy who almost lost a leg, I believe, in Saratoga, was in a army hospital for 5 months, leaves that hospital, and then somewhere in that mix decides, I'm going to jump ship and go to the other side.
Well, I think he doesn't get credit, right? I mean, the credit goes to Hal or whatever, and he doesn't really do much.
Right.
Wounded, for crying out loud.
Yep. And then the British lose the war. He goes back to Britain because America is not a home for him anymore. And the British are just like the Americans. Well, you were a traitor, right? I mean, you're a traitor to us just like you are to them, and so how can we trust you?
I wonder, do either of you know, did the injury, if he weren't injured, would he ever have had the time to contemplate and negotiate and have his, do you think that mattered to his decision? To his decision to jump ship and go to the British?
Well, it's a good question, but I'm like kind of with you. I mean, I think part of it is that, he was probably a really great general, right?
Yeah.
I mean, on top of it, he did suffer this,
seemingly,
really serious injury. But I think the key point is that the other generals who didn't do as much were getting all the credit.
Yeah.
So I think that just sort of makes the point, right? If you're sitting in a home or a wounded, and all of a sudden you hear the PR machine go,
right?
Somebody else.
It's like the injured quarterback while the backup is doing really well.
Right. Who gets credit?
And Michelle, Kim, or Leslie are saying, "Hey, you need to go do this."
Those would be our watch.
Just so you know,
imagine what that tension at home would have been.
Oh
incredible.
I mean, it's amazing. So when he does, John, you might know if he goes, and he didn't jump ship, and he goes to the great. Is it? So he's clearly not welcomed in Britain either.
He's not. No.
So it's probably not a very good.
But he stays there. No, he stays there, and I think when he does finally pass away, his family's still with him. Yeah. But I think they're living a very lonely life. Yeah.
So your question for him would be?
Well, I would want to know why.
How much of this do you need?
Right. I would want to know, was it really that bad? I mean, I know it's hindsight now, but would you have liked? Would you wish you wouldn't have gone now? Yeah. Would you have stayed? Or why wasn't the publicity that you were getting enough?
True. Good question.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So those are things I'd like to ask him. And obviously, was your relationship with Washington strained? Is that why you feel like you weren't moving up the chain, or were you just impatient?
Yeah. So interesting that everybody was jealous of Washington.
Yeah.
Because Arnold, Gates. You mentioned Gates at one point in time was.
Yeah. I mean, eventually he tries to unseat Washington as head of the Continental Army.
Yeah.
Doesn't work, but he tries.
Yeah.
So much stuff.
So I'm wondering, for your Benedict Arnold, right? I wonder what someone would feel like 250 years later, knowing that their name is now synonymous
with traitor.
It's an insult to be called that.
Right.
Oh yeah.
It's an insult.
So I wonder if you to bring that up to him and go, "Hey, dude.
Yeah, what do you think of this?"
just so you're clear.
Did you know? That's pretty good.
I think that actually kind of brings us to our natural conclusion for this episode. But Shmoydo, what are we going to do next week? You kind of keep talking about it a little bit.
So we're looking at the idea. We have a country. Now what? And what we want to look at is early American history and how this sort of fledgling country managed to make itself something more. I know that I learned growing up, we became British colonies, the British were mean to us, and all of a sudden we became a world power, and it didn't exactly happen that way. So we're going to have an interesting look at a transitionary period for the country next time.
Focusing on some of the founders.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, good. On some of the founders. Yeah. Well, I guess that leads us to, the bell, class dismissed.
Ding, ding.
Thanks.